Hello and welcome to Friday's edition of Street Child, and this is going to be our last edition for a while, or possibly, but most probably, because next time we read, we should be back in class, shouldn't we? So Miss Black will be reading, I'll be reading, Mrs. Greslak will be reading, so it'll be different. And we'll be reading at home. You can just see behind me there's some pictures of my pets. Well, the one in the middle passed away a few years ago, but we've got, that is Abby. She's about 10, 11 years old now. Cavalier, and over there is Buddy, who is a Springer / Cavalier crossbreed. And you've seen them already anyway, haven't you? Okay, so chapter 7. And we left it when, if you remember, we had that horrible Mr. Barrack, didn't we? He was just beating the children. You know, he was a bully, wasn't he? And he was a teacher. He wasn't teaching the children, but just hitting them occasionally and just being horrible. But that was kind of what it was like in the Victorian times. It was very hard. You know, adults didn't really, not many adults had respect for children. It was very dark days, to be honest. Anyway, chapter 7, The Wild Thing. Joseph, Jim asked the bent man one day out in the yard, how long have you been here? Been here? Joseph swung his head round and peered up at Jim. Seems like I was born here. Don't know nowhere else, son. And I don't know all this place neither. He leaned against Jim so he could swing his head up to look at the long, high building with its rows of barred windows. I've not been in this room where the women go, though not long ago I must have been in the baby room, I suppose, with my ma. I've been in the infirmary wards, but there's all kinds of little twisty corridors and attics and places I've never been in, Jim, and I don't want to neither. It's the whole world, this place. He spread out his hands. The whole world. It ain't, Joseph, Jim told him. There's no shops here, no carriages, and no trees. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to try and remember what it was like outside. And there's no river. There's a great big river outside here. Is there? Said Joseph. I should like to see that river, though, to tell you the truth, Jim, I don't know what a river is. Tell you something, that. He put his arm over Jim's shoulder to draw his ear closer to his mouth. I don't want to die here. If someone will let me know what day I'm going to die, I'll be grateful. I'll climb over that wall first. He dropped his head down and again and stared at his boots, whistling softly. Yeah, that's what I'll do. Tip spluttered and nudged Jim. But Jim was looking up at the high walls that surrounded the workhouse and the bleak sky above it. How long have you been here, Tip? He asked. How should I know? Tip hugged his arms around himself, keeping moving. Jim, it's cold. It was impossible to tell one day from the next. They were all the same. School, sack making, bed. The only thing that changed was the sky. Jim had seen the grey of snow clouds turning into the soft rain clouds of spring. He'd felt summer scorching him in his heavy, itchy clothes, and now the sky was steely grey again. The pump had long beads of ice on its handle. I've been here a year, Jim said. It was then that the little secret promise that had nestled inside him began to flutter into life like a wild thing. So nestled, it's like getting yourself comfortable. So birds will sort of nestle in their beds. Sometimes we'll nestle inside our beds or on our sofa. I've got to skip off. He let the mad through rise up in him, inside of him. If I don't, I'll be like Joseph. One day I won't remember whether I was born here or not. I won't know anywhere but here. During lessons that day, the old schoolmaster's voice droned on and on in the dim schoolroom. The boys coughed and shuffled in their benches, hunching themselves against the cold. Jim's wild thoughts drummed inside him, so loud that he imagined everyone would hear them. He leaned over to Tip and whispered in his ear, Tip, I'm going to run away today. Come with me. Tip sheared round and put his hand to his mouth. Mr. Barrack sprang down from his chair, his eyes alight with anger and joy. You spoke, he said to Jim, triumphantly. It was you. Tip closed his eyes and held out his hand. Jim stood up. He didn't mind. He didn't mind anything anymore. The teacher hauled him with his stool and swung his rope round. It hummed as it sliced through the air. I don't mind, Jim tried to explain, but this made Mr. Barrack angrier than ever. At last he had caught Jim out, and he was beating him now for every time he had tried and failed. He pulled a greasy handkerchief out of his pocket and wound it around Jim's head, tying it tight under his chin. Just in case you feels like hollering, he said. All the other boys stared in front of them. The rope stung Jim again and again, and the beating inside him was like a wild bird now, throbbing in his limbs and in his stomach, in his chest and in his head, so wild and loud that he felt it would lift him up and carry him away. When the schoolmaster had finished with him, he flung him like a bundle of rags across the desk. Jim lay in shimmer of pain and thrumming wings. He wanted to sleep. The bell rang and the boys shuffled out. Jim felt Tip's hand on his shoulder. He flinched away. It's a flinch, like a sudden movement. That's what they do to boys who skip off, Jim, Tip whispered. They thrash them like that day for like every day they've gone. It's like the worst beating ever. Jim felt the wild thing fluttering again. Only if they catch them. They always catch them. Bobbies catch them and bring them in, and they get thrashed and thrashed. Bobbies, policemen. It's a nickname for them. Jim struggled to sit up. The stinging rolled down his body. Won't you come with me? I danced, honest, I danced. Don't go, Jim. Jim looked up at the great archways of the schoolroom. He knew the words off by heart. God is good, God is holy, God is just, God is love. I've got to go, he said. And I'm going tonight, Tip. Wow, that was powerful, wasn't it? That horrible character, Mr. Barrack again. He was desperate to kind of get Jim one day, but every time Tip would stand up for him. But today was different. Something had changed inside of Jim, hadn't it? He suddenly became a lot braver, more positive. And even though he took that beating from Mr. Barrack, who sounded like he was a man possessed. Horrible. That even though he knew if he got caught again, he would get a serious beating again. But that did not deter him. I was like, wow, that is amazing, because I could see his friend Tip was like, no, don't do it, don't. I don't want to get a beating. But Jim was being more positive. He's being brave, wasn't he? He said, no, I don't care. I have got to go. I am sick of this. I am going no matter what. Well, all I can say is good luck, Jim. Fingers crossed. I hope he does it. But what do you think? Do you think Jim will escape tonight? If so, how and what will he do? Where will he go? But if not, what is going to happen to him? I really don't want to think. I dread to think what would happen to Jim if he got caught. Right. Look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good weekend.